Ladies and gentlemen, Rex Bear League Project. How the heck are you? Have you heard of Mars? Have you heard of life on Mars? Have you heard of NASA? Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We have Tim Cohen with us. He is an author, public speaker. He used to be an Air Force cadet, and I have to turn that way down. That is really loud. There we go. All right. So, folks, we have a very interesting show ahead of us, and I just got done looking at some pictures off the air that Tim had showed me that are supposed to be from the Mars rover via NASA. And very interesting, very interesting. So we're going to get your take on this and let Tim explain what these things are. Really excited about this. And also, folks, I want to let you know this podcast is brought to you in part by TradeLikeAGenius.com. Do you want to become a crypto Jedi? Do you want to become successful and not even have to leave your house? How about in your pajamas? Hey, you don't even have to get dressed at all. Just stay away from the windows if the blinds are open. Go to TradeLikeAGenius.com. Get access to a network of some of the best traders in the world. I'm a part of it. It's amazing. Every single morning, I open up my emails, and I get these trade calls. It'll say buy or sell, and it's that easy. Your access to a network of some of the best traders in the world and the best software on the planet. Now, is there better software on Mars? There might be, but I haven't been there yet, at least that I remember. Tim, you might know about some better software on Mars for Bitcoin.
Well, you guys,
thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for coming on the program. It's good to talk to you. How the heck are you?
I'm great. I'm happy to be with you. Nice to
yeah. We're having a little bit of a delay here, time-wise. It's great to have you on the show. We were going to do it the other day. Some issues happened on my end. My apologies, but we're definitely going to make up for it now. We've got a huge crowd here already, and I want to get into your work. I mean, let's jump right in. Let's take a look at some of these pictures, and for those that haven't heard of you before, just do a real quick intro and your website and your YouTube channel. I'll leave the links for those in the video description box as well if people would like to know more.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a longtime author. I've got a website called prophecyhouse.com. That's my publisher. Got a couple books out, many more on the way, including 8 books dealing with exobiology. So my most recent book is North Korea, Iran, and the Coming World War. Before that, The Antichrist and a Cup of Tea, and then a bunch of related books, then, of course, these exobiology books. Past Air Force service member, attended the Air Force Academy class of 1988. And in fact, just got back from my 30th class reunion this week. So that was exciting. And yeah, and in this series of exobiology books, Rex, I'm giving evidence that there's dangerous, complex biological life throughout our solar system, not only on Mars, but on our moon and several other bodies. And basically, I am completely upending macroevolutionistic cosmology with the series.
You know what? I think that we need to, the whole beginning, my audio was toast. And I know that's gonna mess with the views because nobody's gonna want to watch through that. So is the sound good now?
Now I'm hearing you fine. It was kind of garbled on my end. I didn't know how it was on yours.
Well, they're saying it was really bad. So I think that to do this justice, I would like to redo the podcast. We'll just redo it. So folks, I'm going to go ahead and stop this and redo it. Don't leave, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just hitting stop and then I'm starting back. So we're going to be back in just a. Ladies and gentlemen, Rex Bear League Project, we are back. I hope that the audio is good now and that I'm not blowing up your eardrums. We have legendary Tim Cohen with us. He is a longtime author, researcher. He was in the Air Force as well. I don't know if he was a part of the secret space program. If he was, he can't tell us because that's classified. But we've got a whole bunch of images that are going to be presented in this podcast that are from Mars, from the Mars rover via NASA. And the question is, has NASA discovered life on Mars and on the moon? And now, is the sound good? We're still good? Okay, good. So I'm looking at the comments here as I'm doing this. So folks, we're going to look at these pictures, and real quick, I got to give another shout out. Check out the specials right now at TradeLikeAGenius.com. There's a special 45% discount with the code REX45. If you want to become a crypto trading Jedi and you don't even want to leave your house and be successful out of the convenience of your own home, go to TradeLikeAGenius.com. Get access to the best traders and the best software in the industry. It is amazing. I'm a part of this network. It's fantastic. Every day I check my emails to either buy or sell, whether it's Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum. the top coins out there. It's a great opportunity. Check it out. Get the 45% discount. The 45% discount is good for everything minus bundles and personal coaching. Those are already discounted. So again, this is really exciting to have you on the program, Tim. We don't have the gremlins this time, and we're going to look at a plethora of images from the Mars rover that could be remains of extraterrestrial life. So, Tim, thanks for coming back on. Sorry about all the gremlins, man.
Oh, no problem. Happy to be with you. So, yeah, I had mentioned in our initial attempt that I just got back from my 30th class reunion with the Air Force Academy. So that was really exciting, and had a good time this week there. And so, no, I was not part of a secret space program, but obviously I did serve in the military and the Air Force.
So you were in the Air Force, and yeah, I was just joking around, kind of tongue in cheek there. But why did you start to get into this research? Let's talk about that for a minute. For those that haven't read your books or been to your website, and I'm leaving the link to your website and your YouTube channel in the video description box. So, you know, you've written many books, and you've been an author for a long time. So, but why Mars? Like, what made you start to research Mars and the moon and the secret space program?
Well, of course, I was interested in the whole issue of ETs, so to speak, and UFOs and what that was really about for a long time. You know, how that fits in with scripture, because I'm a Bible scholar, basically. I wrote The Antichrist and a Cup of Tea, and then I've got a Messiah, History and the Tribulation Period series, multi-volume set that is a systematic theology coming out. And then this year I came out with North Korea, Iran, and the Coming World War, and I'm showing how that relates to Bible prophecy and just a bunch of other books like that. And in the middle, a series of books on exobiology. And the thing that really triggered me on that is I was looking a number of years ago at some of these rover photos, and we've got basically 4 landers, 3 rovers active on the surface of Mars. One died, I guess. But Spirit, Opportunity, and Curiosity are the most recent ones. And so I was looking at those, and when I saw the first obviously living dinosaur in one of those photos, I thought, oh man, I've got to look at this more closely. And since then, I discovered that there's life all over our solar system, and it's obvious in many of the photos from various space agencies, not only NASA.
Just yesterday, there was images that were sent back from 2 rovers, probes, that were sent to an asteroid via Japan. And it was incredible to look at these pictures that they sent back. And I'm just so amazed at the technologies now, where you've got countries that can send probes to asteroids that are flying thousands of miles an hour through space, just launch them out there, then they land, and then they can send us pictures back. That's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yep. Yeah. So I won't say too much about that, but I'll tell you in my Solar Apocalypse series of books, it's 7 volumes, and then there's an 8th book, which is a picture book of creatures all over our solar system, and that includes on comets and asteroids. But there's a book that deals with basically scientific and other background to show how life is possible in some of these environments, including on Earth's moon, on the surface of our moon. You know, things that were thought to be impossible are not. So to show how that's possible, what the real atmosphere of Mars is like, et cetera, then there's a volume that gives evidence for complex biological life, dangerous life on the surface of Mars. Another one on our moon, another one on comets and asteroids and Pluto and other planets, et cetera, in our solar system. A book that deals with, for example, secret space programs. You know, that's quite interesting. Another volume that deals with soft disclosures in television and media and so forth. You know, we've had all these movies and television shows depicting all kinds of strange things with aliens and monsters for decades. Pardon me. And it turns out that a lot of those things actually exist in some form. So we've been, you know, given facts dressed up as fiction, and that's a fascinating odyssey itself in that volume. So basically, I'm being fairly comprehensive, Rex, to the whole thing, and I'm showing that we've been lied to by all the space agencies, and that, in fact, the evidence that I give in this series upends macroevolutionistic cosmology, makes it impossible scientifically for our solar system.
Well, you know, you can get into the Fermi paradox, and it asks multiple questions about if the universe is infinite, if it's as big as we think it is, if there's so much life out there, how come we don't just look in a telescope and see giant Dyson spheres and all this intelligent life? And I mean, I think that there's a lot of evidence for remains of life on the moon, on Mars, and on these other planets. I think that there's plenty of, there's also been bursts, these very fast bursts of sounds that are coming from billions of miles away. And they're so intense that it would take what is speculated, people speculate, a type 2 civilization to send that signal because of the amount of power that it would take to do so. I think it's called FRB 112012 or something. I don't remember the exact number. I'll have to double clarify that, but they've had dozens of these fast radio bursts from this area. And so with Mars, though, here's the thing, because, and I'm just going to, play devil's advocate here for a minute. And I'm going to have an open mind, but I'm also going to be open-minded, but not so open-minded that my brain falls out on the sidewalk. Your brain has to be open to work, just like a parachute, but it can't be too open. So I have seen incredible images from the Mars rover. I have seen some images before that have made me go, no way. Like I have seen this one that you can clearly see looks like a pharaoh was carved into a cliff, and there's even a pathway that leads down to it. And then there's areas that are blocked out, and then you can see some areas that look like they've been photoshopped and stuff. And that was the image that I saw that just blew me away. And then I saw this other image of what looked like a Spider-Man hanging out in this cliff dwelling on Mars rover, via Mars rover. But then I started to get a lot of information about the Mars rover. People were saying the Mars rover is actually in Greenland. Well, there is a network of rovers that they're doing testing. It's not in Greenland. It's actually in Canada, but it's close to Greenland. It's northeast Canada, and it's in this just real remote area that looks like Mars. But when I saw that picture of the Mars rover that took a picture of a little rat running, did you see that one where there was that rat running on the ground? The Mars rover supposedly took it?
I did. In fact, that what you're calling a rat, they're actually better photos. If you go up, for example, on the internet and you just Google mouse on Mars, you'll find photos that were put out of a rodent that's more convincing than that rat. But the one you're talking about was taken in an area called Rock Nest, and surrounding it everywhere is fossils. In fact, when I go and speak October 5th and 6th at DisclosureCon, I'm going to print out a little exercise that I prepared for those who come, that I'm going to hand out to them so they can go up to that panoramic image from NASA, pull it off the internet directly, and locate all kinds of fossils around that rat that you're talking about, that rodent, whatever you want to call it, on Mars. So it's actually surrounded by fossils.
And the area that I'm talking about is actually called the Vaughn Island, where they're doing a lot of this testing. It's called the Vine Island. Hold on a second. Oops. And that's where I think that Mars rover image came from. I personally don't think that image that they showed of the rat running across the ground or the rodent, I don't think that was from Mars. I think that was actually from Devon Island. If you look up Devon Island and the landscape out there and you Google Earth it, you look at the satellite imagery, it looks identical to many of these images from the Mars rover. And what I've also noticed is a lot of these images from the Mars rover, the later images, not like the first couple years. If you go back to the first couple years, those look like raw images that were sent from the rover. But then after that, it's like something changed. They got more high end, more detailed. Now, I'm not saying that all the pictures that they send us aren't from Mars, but I think that they're kind of playing this bait and switch again, where they're probably there. They've probably got much more advanced civilization and technologies there than we know about. But what they're showing us is kind of like wag the dog stuff, because people have brought up good points. Like, how could the rover keep itself clean through all these storms for years? Like, wouldn't there have to be somebody there, cleaning the lens or something? Otherwise, because of all the dust storms and stuff. Have you thought about that?
Well, I have. So I'm not familiar perhaps with a particular rodent image that you're talking about, but I can say I'm convinced that all of the rovers are in fact on Mars, and that the images that NASA is putting out are in fact from Mars. So we've got, Spirit, Opportunity, and Curiosity. Spirit got stuck and basically became useless a while back. Opportunity is out of communication with NASA currently because of a huge Martian dust storm. Curiosity is still operating. That being said, I am familiar with the solar panels suddenly being strangely clean. But here's part of the problem, Rex. NASA has lied to the public about the real atmosphere on Mars. Not only have the whistleblowers, who I believe have been to Mars, testified to that reality, and I'll explain why I think they were there when we show some of the images. But not only did they testify to the fact that Mars had a breathable atmosphere, kind of like being at 14 or 15,000 foot altitude here on Earth. So thin, and not a lot of oxygen, but enough to just breathe and do it uncomfortably. But they also said that it was warmer than NASA claimed. During the daytime, it could get up to 70 some degrees. So colder, obviously, at night. But the point is, much different than NASA has claimed, much higher atmospheric pressure. And if those claims are true, and NASA has been lying about the real atmosphere of Mars, and we've got visible dust devils on Mars. NASA's put out GIFs, moving images of dust devils on Mars. Those dust devils can't happen at the atmospheric pressures that NASA has claimed for Mars. So if Mars has a different atmosphere, it's easier to see how the rovers might get their solar panels cleaned occasionally from the weather on Mars. On the other hand, there are people who claim that we've got folks walking the surface of Mars, and somebody went up and literally Windexed the solar panels, on Spirit.
It's the new Mars version, though. It's got an updated chemical. No, this right here, I'm interrupting because I want to kind of confirm about the atmosphere. This picture was taken in 1995. This was on, I think, they even put this on a Time magazine cover, and you can see blue ozone. You can see ice caps. Yes. There's water there.
Yeah.
Please continue. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm just saying this is incredible that we're looking at Mars and there's an atmosphere.
We've got photos of unambiguous running liquid water. We presume it's water, but it's liquid. And, down the sides of hills that the rovers have photographed. We've seen that change from orbit over time. So we know seasonally on Mars, we do get running water. One of the interesting things about Mars soil is that it's much higher in certain salts like perchlorates than Earth's soil, which means that water does not freeze at the same temperature as it would here on Earth. It has a much lower freezing point on Mars. So in other words, water can be liquid on Mars at much colder temperatures than here on Earth, just because of the salts throughout the soil. So there's liquid water on Mars. There's, NASA's admitted to a lot of ice under the soil at points around Mars, around the planet. And it's thought that there are perhaps even underground oceans, of water. So there's a lot of water still on Mars, not on the surface like on Earth, but there's still plenty of water.
Mars is fascinating. I've always been fascinated with Mars. Andrew, I have been attempting to interview him now for the past couple of weeks, but we've just had things coming back and forth. And I know that, he's working on some things right now. So may the force be with him. But I've wanted to talk to Andrew for, 8 years. First I heard about him, Project Pegasus, the time travel, the jump rooms. And, why don't we do this? Because we've been talking for a fair amount of time, and the audience is excited to see what these pictures look like. So I'll go ahead and let you show the images. This is great.
All right, let me know if this works. You seeing an image?
Yep, looks great.
All right, so I don't know how many folks in your audience, Rex, have ever heard an interview with Andrew Basiago or William Whitecrow or any of these other folks who claim to have been on the surface of Mars. And I personally interviewed most of those people, the prominent ones, the well-known ones, for several hours each without having told them anything at all about me as an author, who I am, what I'm working on, what I know about Mars or anywhere else in our solar system, nothing. They agreed to interview with me only because they had been asked to do that by people they knew. So I interviewed Andrew Basiago for about 10 hours. I interviewed William Whitecrow for about 10 hours. Those are two individuals whom I'm convinced were in fact on the surface of Mars. And one of the things that they both described, particularly Andrew Basiago, is this thing that you're seeing in front of you now. Andy called it a plesiosaur, and it's not what paleontologists on Earth would call a plesiosaur, which was a water-dwelling creature, with fin-like protrusions rather than legs, and not a surface animal at all. Andy described this creature that he called a plesiosaur on Mars as having a fat tortoise-like body, which is what we see here on the left, a horse-like head, and a thick serpent-like neck. So if you can see that, hopefully the cursor's showing up, but I'm going over it. So on the right-hand side, we've got this serpent-like neck, S-shaped neck, a roughly horse-shaped head, and this fat tortoise-like body. So I was aware of this fossil. This was photographed by the Curiosity rover. It's sitting in the middle, actually, of a bunch of artificial structures. It's literally sitting in an area where there's been excavation and construction on Mars, and like a quarry. And so I had to zoom in on this. NASA took 4 photographs of this thing. This is a fossil that's been excavated, I presume, but it's sitting on the surface of Mars, fully exposed. Behind it is like this, the surface of a hill. You know, it's higher. The elevation is right behind it. With a bunch of other fossils, they're very hard to see because this is not a great quality photo. It's from a long distance. There's a lot of more in the pattern, but in essence, on the end of this thing, there are more fossils stuck to this fat body. But when I first heard Andy talking publicly about this, he described, you know, his jump room experiences, teleportation to Mars, and I thought, okay, well, I'm not buying that. That was my initial attitude. And then he talked about dinosaurs roaming the surface of Mars that he encountered, others encountered there, that were dangerous, carnivorous, deadly. And I thought, well, okay, that's interesting. I thought it was interesting because, of course, I have photos of dinosaurs on the surface of Mars. But there were people like George Adamski, for example, in the past who claimed to have been taken aboard flying discs, saucers, to other planets where he photographed dinosaurs outside of the craft with a Polaroid camera, and then showed these photos and presentations that he gave, you know, a long time ago. And those photos, in my view, were easily enough faked, so I didn't take it too seriously. You know, I still wasn't quite buying what Andy had to say. And then he said that there was this plesiosaur type thing that chased him back to the jump room on the surface of Mars. And he described it as having a tortoise-like body, you know, moved fast enough to catch a human being, but barely. A fat tortoise-like body, a serpent-like neck, and a horse-like head. And as soon as I heard that, I thought, okay, I need to pay more attention to what this guy is saying, because that is exactly how I would have described it. And so Andy was describing this creature back in 2008, 2009 publicly, both in writing, in a booklet that he put out, and also in radio and television interviews. And this photo that we're looking at here was taken years later by the Curiosity rover. And in fact, the Curiosity rover was landed on the surface of Mars years later. So NASA, in other words, photographed something that Andy was describing years before the photograph was taken. And that's what this is. Again, not a great photo, but it's clear enough to see that it's a horse-like head, you know, roughly, and an S serpent-like neck going into this fat tortoise-like body. And the thing is sitting on the surface. And I'll mention also, Rex, that when I first saw this, before I heard Andy talking, I thought, okay, the Martians are Satanists, because I've got photos also of humanoid remains on the surface of Mars. I thought this thing was a statue initially, before I realized that it was a flash fossilized fossil. So this is important for the audience to understand. You know, everybody who's looking at this, fossils on Earth are usually just bones. That's all we normally see. Once in a great while on Earth, we'll see a full creature that's been fossilized. So the audience could go and Google Nodosaur, N-O-D-O-S-A-U-R. That's a great example of a flash fossilized dinosaur from Earth. And the whole creature is preserved. Its entire exterior appearance is preserved. And what's required for that to happen, and it's a rarity on Earth, is a high salt content in the soil, so perchlorates, in other words, bacteria. There has to be bacterial, microbial life, water, and then the proper temperature. So if a creature dies in water with the right temperature, that's got the right bacteria in it, and is also high in perchlorates, these salts that are actually very abundant on Mars, then the whole thing can fossilize in a period of hours to days, literally, very, very rapidly, and the whole exterior appearance of the creature is preserved. So on Mars, bones, and there are bones that people have found on Mars, are the exception. What we usually find instead are full fossils in various states of decay, like this plesiosaur thing that we're looking at. So long-winded description, but I believe this is an example of why we can take Andrew Basiago seriously when he says he was on the surface of Mars. And William Whitecrow, who's now deceased, he died earlier this year, unfortunately, described the same thing, the same creature in interviews to me and also publicly, years before NASA photographed this thing. And both Andy and William say they were on Mars together with each other. So I can move on to another photo. Shall I do that, Rex?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. So this is a NASA photo, a little bit better quality, actually. I have not color adjusted it. So let me just give an example. So this is the photo as NASA presented the colors in the image. If I just do auto adjust in this program here, Find View, you can see it lightened up a little bit. I can undo that and we'll manually adjust it just a little bit to give the audience an idea of how this thing can be brought out a little better. So remove some of the green here. All right, so this is just a slight adjustment with your Find View. But what I want to point out is the upper left area of this photo is fossils in the rock. Any paleontologist on Earth, Rex, would immediately recognize that we're looking at fossils in the upper right portion of this rock. So where I'm moving the cursor, hopefully the audience can see that in the upper right area of the photo. You got two eye areas, two protrusions from this creature's head, something in the back of it. As I go down the fossil, this is a reptile's head that's flash fossilized. You can make out some teeth in the mouth right here at the bottom. Here's the eye area. Again, this is decayed to a significant extent. But again, these are fossils in the upper right area of this rock. In the background, there's possibly a fossil, maybe a living creature, but probably a fossil. Where I'm moving the cursor around, you got a couple eyes, the mouth. But what I want to point out is in the lower left-hand area of this same photo is a living dinosaur. So let me undo those adjustments here. You know, many reptiles on Earth, if you look at them, even the camouflaged ones, their eyes do not camouflage. They're not, you know, like chameleons and so forth. They're not able to camouflage their eyes in many instances, even if they can camouflage the rest of their skin. Many of the creatures on Mars blend in because they actually have active camouflage. This is an example of one that I think does. But here in the lower left corner of this photo is the nose of a dinosaur that's peeking out from behind this rock, and it's blended its color to match the rock that we're looking at. But you'll notice the eye is still red next to that copyright text. The eye is not blended. So you're seeing the chin of the creature, its nose, its eye, and its forehead, and it's peeking out from behind this rock that has fossils in it at the upper right. So that's an example of a dinosaur that's partially exposed. We're only seeing some of its head. So these creatures on Mars are cautious. In many cases, we only ever see their heads. But I'm going to show some creatures, Rex, that are fully exposed. That's a rarity on Mars. You know, on Earth, when creatures, amphibians, reptiles, insects are trying to protect themselves from the elements and from predators. So, for example, when it's cold, they'll bury themselves in the soil and they'll only expose enough of their body to keep themselves alive, to breathe, to eat, to see. That's it. And in many cases on Mars, we only see heads, both from dead creatures that have been fossilized, died and fossilized, and also from living ones. This is an instance where that creature is probably walking the surface behind this rock, and we're just seeing its head exposed. So let's move on to some other examples. This is a fully exposed creature, might be a flash fossilized thing like that plesiosaur that we looked at. If it is a fossil, it's a better quality fossil. The photo is better than that plesiosaur that we were looking at. But this is another creature that Andrew Basiago has described in interviews, and he described it in 10 hours of interviews to me before I showed him anything and before he knew I was an author or what I was working on or anything else. He described this creature that he called a dump truck-sized locust. In other words, this very large insectoid that rather than having the head of a locust like you would see on Earth, instead had a mantid-shaped head, more of a heart-shaped mantis-like head. And he said it was carnivorous. It was very fast. And if it caught you on the surface, you should just sit down and let the thing kill you quickly because you couldn't escape it. And what I love about this photo, what I find so interesting, whether it's a fossil or not, is that you can clearly see the whole left side of the creature. You can clearly see the segments of 3 of its legs. This is an insectoid, so these are insect legs, you know, exoskeleton, in other words. So the first leg here is at the bottom. I'm moving the cursor across it. Here's the segmented middle leg, moving the cursor across that. So here's, you know, like the bottom portion of the leg, the upper portion of the leg. There's the joint. There's the joint for these 2 legs. Here is the front leg. It's got 3 segments in the front leg. You know, there's the shoulder, second segment, third segment. So again, 3 legs that you can see on the side. It doesn't have wings. Instead of wings, it's got these wing-like appendages, you know, at the back of the creature at the top. You can see it's V-shaped, you know, where they split apart, kind of like they were wings, but they're not wings. And then you can see in front of the head of the creature, and it is a heart-shaped head, right behind that copyright text. So if you look behind the Y, the R, the I, the G, and the copyright, there's the head. It's got its 2 eyes, the mouth, and then right below its mouth, between its 2 front legs, and you can see the other front leg sort of shadowed there in the background, is a humanoid skull. In other words, this creature looks like it just had a meal. And the skull could be a human skull, literally. It's got the 2 eyes. There's the mouth and the jaw, the forehead. You can't see a lot of the skull, but the portion that you can see matches a human or a humanoid skull. In other words, this creature just had a meal and it's carnivorous. Here's another. Here's the same creature, just different lighting conditions. So I put it through an HDR filter so people can kind of see as I flip back and forth a little more detail on this thing as the lighting changes a little bit. But again, here's the same humanoid skull, the mantis-shaped, heart-shaped kind of head on this creature. It's segmented body like a locust, but it's not a locust, obviously. This is a very large creature. It's not as big as a dump truck, you know, like Andrew Basiago described, but you can see the size of this humanoid skull. It's as big as, you know, a car or a small truck would be here on Earth. It's pretty good sized. So again, I believe this is an example, again, of a creature that Andrew Basiago uniquely described to me. I've got that initial 10 hours of interviews recorded where you described that. And at some point, I will post that on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Timothy Cohen. So you folks can see that. By the way, you all can go there and see an interview with William Whitecrow, where I show William Whitecrow things that he described in his interviews to me, photos that I have and got his reactions, captured them live in that half-hour interview. At any rate, so this is a second thing that Andrew Basiago described. And we'll move on here. But again, let me just point out to all of you who are looking at this, this could be a flash fossilized fossil, but there's no way it's a pile of rocks. You can't find a pile of rocks with this kind of structure any place on the surface of the earth, period. You could look your whole lifetime, spend every moment, every waking moment of your life. You'd never find anything like this on earth. These are not rocks. This is a living creature, or more likely, a fossil like that plesiosaur thing. All right, this is a blown up version of a creature that's just inches. It's much smaller. It's inches in size. It's close to the rover. Right here in the upper left corner, and it's actually looking across at a bunch of blue things that look like eggs, but they're not eggs. They're actually hatching in some cases. I'm not showing that in this photo, but they're little turtle-like creatures. But this thing is a little dinosaur. It's not a snake. This is the head where my mouse is moving around in the upper left corner. There's the eye, the nose. This is the nose of the creature and its forehead. The eye. It's actually got little protrusions like not eyelashes, but little things that are sticking up above its eye right here. There's a black one. You can sort of see it. And then the mouth is completely opened as if it's yawning right here. And unfortunately, the text is kind of covering up the body a little bit, but it's actually got legs, and it's mostly buried under the soil here, back behind this copyright word. But it's not a snake. The head is a dinosaur-like head. It's a little dinosaur, I believe. But again, the kind of structure that you don't see in rocks. You can't find a rock with that kind of structure anywhere on the surface of the earth. You can find creatures, you know, snakes that look a little bit like that. But again, a living creature on the surface of Mars. This is one of my favorite photos. This is sitting inside of a huge panorama that NASA put out. It's directly from NASA. I brightened it, so it's actually a bit darker than this in the original photo. Both of these photos have been put through, or this blow up, this crop, has been put through an HDR photo to adjust the lighting. You can also do something like lighten and brighten some of these filters in Photoshop and other programs, but there's been no manual editing to this photo whatsoever. I put it through filters to adjust the brightness so you can see additional details. This creature is bigger than you and I, Rex, photographed again at a long distance. It's surrounded literally by hundreds of other creatures. And in the overall panorama, there are thousands of creatures. And so I picked this one because I particularly like this image, because this creature has an intelligent appearance. And I'll just point out some of what we're looking at. Again, it's bigger than you and I. So let me go back and forth so people can just see it in different lighting here for a moment before I point out aspects to this creature. So many of the creatures on Mars are hybrids. I believe that they came from Earth, that their genes are here from Earth. In other words, they didn't originate solely on Mars. They're reproducing on Mars now, but they're hybrids of amphibians, reptiles, and insects. And in this one creature, you can actually see amphibian, and I should say humans also. In this creature, you can see features that are amphibian, insect, and perhaps humanoid. And I'll just point out what those are now. Whoop. Okay, so it's got this large frog-like almost amphibian kind of a mouth with a serrated kind of an edge instead of teeth to the mouth. It's got this shallow bridge-like nose right here. You can see the shadow for the eye, and then it's got a rectangular ear, and I'll just draw the mouse over that. The copyright is covering that up a bit. But the ear is actually rectangular here. And it's got this intelligent-looking forehead. So it looks like an intelligent creature. And that head that we're looking at, Rex, is bigger probably than yours and mine, but it's at least as big as your head and my head. There's a shoulder here like you'd see on an insect that's got these dot-like protrusions going in a circle around it, and this round shoulder here, that's a joint right here where I'm drawing the mouse. And it has a depression in it right here. So you got an extrusion here, and then a depression from that joint, and it goes back, and the creature's leg is folded right here where I'm moving the mouse. So you can't see the rest of the leg here. It's beneath the horizon. But anyway, that is a leg that's folded right there. And then going all the way back here, right above this line where I've got the copyright text, but right above this line where I'm moving the cursor, is a set of what I believe are folded wings. In other words, this creature might actually be capable of flight. So let me go back to the darker version of it here. Around its neck is this flange-like thing, and it's hard to see it in the photo, but there's actually a flange-like set of protrusions like you'd see on, I don't know, a flared-like insect head. I don't know what that is, but it's there. At any rate, this thing is sitting on the surface of Mars, and it's eating something. There's another little creature right here where I'm drawing the mouse that it's actually chewing on. So this creature is alive. It's sitting on the surface of Mars, almost fully exposed, probably with folded wings, probably capable of actually flying in Mars' atmosphere, unlike that locust-sized dump truck that we saw, or dump truck-sized locust that we saw. But this is an amphibian-like creature that's got insectoid and humanoid features, probably an intelligent creature, a hybrid on the surface of Mars. And by the way, any paleontologist would look at this and know it's not a rock. Most biologists, astrobiologists, would look at this and know it's not a rock. It may be difficult for the average human being like you and I to look at this for the first time and see that we're looking at something other than rocks, but the patterns that we're seeing here are not something that you can find in rocks anywhere. You can find them in some very good fossils, like flash fossilized fossils, but again, not in rocks. And this is a creature.
Can I ask you a question, Tim? Have you ever thought about showing your work to a paleontologist to see what they would think of the possibility of the fossilized remains, like you're discussing with us?
In fact, I have made contacts with paleontologists, entomologists, other biologists who have PhDs, all of them, for that very purpose. And I intend to get quotes from them. This is one of the last things that I'll be putting in the books, the Solar Apocalypse series, which will be out in the next few months. It's available for pre-publication purchase right now. But yes, I am getting written statements from people who have PhDs in these areas: biology, paleontology, entomology, dealing with insects, and then the equivalent fields for amphibians and reptiles. Zoologists, for example. So these people are going to look at these things and they're going to know right off the bat that they're not rocks. And I've asked them to go on record, give me written statements that I can cite in the books for that purpose. So that if NASA comes along later, Rex, the average person who's ever spent any time with fossils, insects, et cetera, are going to look at these photos that I'm showing you, and they're going to realize these are not rocks. But for those who are having trouble with this, the PhDs will come out and say, yeah, these are not rocks, will be sufficiently convincing. And of course, when NASA comes along, NASA knows very well these aren't rocks. And if NASA says, oh yeah, those are rocks or whatever, well, we'll be able to pretty easily call NASA liars at that point. They've been lying to the public the whole time anyway. So, all right, let's move on to another photo. Okay, this is another one that I just absolutely love. Tony Rodriguez, who is another person who claims to have been in a secret space program. And I can't produce evidence. Let me be clear about that. I'm not able to produce evidence for Tony Rodriguez having participated in such a program or having been on Mars or the moon or anything like that. I can do that, I believe, for Andrew Bjago. I can do that, I believe, for William Whitecrow. Cannot do that for Tony Rodriguez. Doesn't mean he wasn't there. It just means I don't have that evidence. But the reason I mention him is he has described for me in the interviews that I did with him, and also publicly in interviews that he's done with others like Michael Sala, etc., having encountered an ant-like creature on the surface of the moon, or on the moon in a facility, I should say, a large ant-like creature that was quote-unquote alien, that had mandibles. So I showed Tony, when I did my final follow-up interview with him, what you're seeing right here on this screen, but without the copyright notice. This is a head on the surface of Mars. It's not on the moon. Actually, it's multiple heads. Let me just point it out for the audience. And again, folks, you may have a lot of trouble seeing these things as heads, and that's okay, no problem, but I'm going to point it out to you anyway. So this thing here that I'm circling is a fossilized head, not of a living creature, right here that I'm circling. This is the nose of another head. This right down here is another head. This right here is part of another head. This thing back here, and these are not what I'm going to show you in a moment. I want you to see, though. This is the nose of another creature's head, a dinosaur on the surface of Mars, only exposing its head right here. Right here in the middle of all of them is a fully exposed head, except that it's partially covered by a little rodent. And this rodent has a little snout-like nose that goes like this. I've got several photos of these Rex, so I know this is a rodent. I've got several other photos of this particular creature at different angles, different NASA photos, not all of them in a panorama. So I know for a fact that this is a little rodent right here. This is its body. I point this thing out because its head is partially covering one of the two mandibles off of the nose of this skull. So this head right here, the eye is closed. It's got a rectangular ear, not like the other creature we saw, but a rectangular-like ear that's lighter than the rest of the head. Got a very ornate base to its neck, right above the neck area. Again, we're only seeing the head of this creature, that's all. Its eyes closed, and then here's the nose, the bridge and the nose, and we have two mandibles coming off of this thing, kind of like the mandibles that Tony Rodriguez described in that ant-like creature. But that's why I showed him this photo, is there are two mandibles coming off of the nose of this head. One partially obscured by this little rodent right here. But at any rate, this is another head on the surface of Mars, probably of a dead creature, probably a fossil. I can't be completely sure of that, though, because many times these creatures only expose their heads. The eye here is closed, so I'm assuming maybe it's dead. It's also possible that the thing is alive and it's just hibernating, but in any case, it's not a rock, and the coloration is completely different from what's around it. And it's got these two mandibles and a nose. So again, I want to point out, any entomologist would look at this and know that this is not a rock. They'd know that they're looking at some sort of insect-like creature that's not quite an insect, but it's also not quite an animal either. It's some sort of a hybrid. So we'll move on here to our next photo. And let me point out, Rex, too, these creatures we're seeing here, these photos, are also in the middle of hundreds of others. I'm just showing this one. So NASA has taken some incredible photos that are filled with fossils and evident creatures that any paleontologist, entomologist, etc. would look at. They'd know that they're not looking at rocks. And NASA, I think, because they've taken so many photos with their rovers, just one of the rovers, the Curiosity rover alone, has taken hundreds of thousands of photos. So has the Opportunity rover, so has the Spirit rover before that, you know, and that's not even to mention the orbiters, nor to mention anything else that's been photographed in our solar system. So there's so many photos, and oftentimes they're large and there's a lot in them, that I think NASA doesn't even know what it's been releasing to the public in many cases. Although I believe that NASA does know that there's complex biological life on Mars, that there's dangerous life there, and they're definitely lying to the public about that. So they may not know about what I just showed you here. So let's move on. All right, this is another photograph from a great distance. There are two creatures that are evident in this photo. The one in the back, you know, you might think it's a rock, but it's actually a head. So I'm going to put the mouse over the eyes. There's an eye. There's an eye. This is the mouth right here where the mouse is. It's just popping up its head. It's like a snake almost, popping up its head above the surface here. And this is part of its body right behind it, just under the soil right here. But it's looking across at this thing. And this thing in the lower right corner is fully exposed. It's like a little dog on the surface of Mars, except that its head is angular. So I'm going to draw the mouse around the head so people can see it a little better. It's kind of like a diamond-shaped head right here, okay? There's no fur on these creatures. These are hybrids of reptiles, insects, amphibians, probably not insect for this creature. But in any case, a diamond-like head. This is a leg, this is a leg, here's its body. This leg you can see where it's bent at the knee right here, this back leg. And there's a shadow right beneath it. Okay, so you can see, again, this is a shadow. There's a shadow right here. This creature is up above the surface, a shadow right here. So the body of this creature, this dog-like creature, is fully exposed for the rover. Again, taken at a long distance, but again, not a rock. And the pattern here is something that, you know, any biologist would know is not a rock. So we're looking at two creatures in this photo, one looking at the other, maybe thinking, I wonder if I could eat that. I mean, who knows, right? But this is a living creature right here. It's not a fossil. It's not dead. Let's move on. And that's small. That's probably like the size of a dog on Earth. It's not big. This is one of my favorites. This is a photo, Rex, that a lot of people have seen. You know, it's been pointed out on Mars Anomaly Research Society, that group. It's been pointed out by various people who look at photos on Mars. And they've all got it wrong. Every single person who's ever talked about this photo doesn't know what they're looking at. They've all tried to say it's some sort of a structure, you know, that it's an artificial structure on the surface of Mars. That is not what we are looking at. So let me point out what we actually are seeing. I think that this is the head of a pterosaur. Pterosaurs were kind of like pterodactyls on Earth, but much larger. They were about 30 feet high, the largest winged creature known to have lived on Earth. So the head might be, for example, 6 feet on Earth, 6, 7, 8 feet, 10 feet, you know, with a beak on Earth. This head, this is a head that we're looking at. What we're seeing right here is bigger than the rover that photographed it. And in the background, this is taken from dozens of meters away. In the background of the photo, so this is an enlargement and a crop, is the rover. So you can actually see part of the rover as it photographs this thing in the background. And the head right here is bigger than the rover. But what you're looking at is the patterned beak. The top of the beak is patterned, just like you'd see on a reptile on Earth. You know, with the in many reptiles where there's a pattern to the beak. It's not a uniform color. So that's the top of the beak. This is the bottom of the beak and under the chin, right here where I'm moving the mouse. This is the main part of the head. But what confused me, I looked at this Photorex for 2 years before I realized myself what I was looking at. It didn't look like a rock, but I couldn't quite, you know, make heads or tails of what I was seeing either. And finally, I realized what it was. So this is the tip of a wing right here that's coming up over the head. So right here is the tip of a wing that's obscuring part of the neck. And these are claws from one of the feet off the wing right here. So it was this part right here that had me just dumbfounded as I was looking at this thing for 2 years. And then I realized finally this is a pterosaur head, and the rest of the creature is just buried in the soil. It's dead, I presume. But you got a couple of the claws right here. One is casting a shadow. The underside of the beak, the top of the beak, the head area right here. So Andrew Basiago and William Whitecrow described in their interviews for me and also in radio and television interviews that they have done for several years, having encountered dive-bombing pterodactyls on the surface of Mars. Neither of them talked about encountering a pterosaur, but they did talk about encountering pterodactyls and having to shoot them, kill them. In other words, the weapons that they had, so that they literally wouldn't bite their heads off, so these creatures wouldn't pluck off the heads of the visitors to Mars. So a pterodactyl has a bony protrusion off the back of its head, which we do not see on a pterosaur, and we do not see on this creature. So this is not a pterodactyl, but I do think it's a pterosaur's head. So we'll move on from there. Again, not a rock. Anybody would look at this. Any biologist who has a PhD dealing with reptiles would know that they are looking at a head that resembles a reptile. A paleontologist would know that that head resembles a pterosaur. And by the way, let me point out, these are some teeth that are actually visible. They're really hard to make out in this photo, but there are a few teeth right here where I'm moving the cursor, the mouse pointer, between the lower beak and the upper beak right here. A few teeth are visible on this side. So, okay, let's move on from that one. All right, Rex, this is a photograph that's got, you know, 3 creatures, 2 of which are reasonably made out. There are actually several other creatures in here, but I'm not going to bother pointing them out because they're just too hard to recognize. It's a somewhat blurry photo, so I'm not going to make anybody strain for that. But notice where the copyright text is running, left, bottom left corner to upper right corner. And the reason for that is, you know, I'm protecting these images until the books are out. But folks, you can go to YouTube right now and you can see this image without the copyright text in that interview with William Whitecrow. And the reason it's in that interview is because William Whitecrow, in the 10 hours of interviews with me, described this creature that you see in the upper right corner of this image. He described these boar-like creatures that he described as having a ridged back. So they're hybrids, in other words, not actually boars, but they had a pig-like nose and this ridged forehead and this boar-like, well, this ridged back, I guess I'll say. That's how he described them in the interview. And he said that they would typically hunt in packs. You'd see them on Mars in packs from the air in these anti-gravity craft. He traveled to Mars, according to him, through anti-gravity craft. Not the same way that Andrew Basiago claimed to get there. Andrew Basiago claimed to get to Mars through teleportation. So they got their different ways, but they both claimed to have been on Mars together. William Whitecrow was serving as a guard, a Vietnam War vet, serving in a capacity as a guard for VIPs, very important persons, visiting Mars through teleportation, through the jump rooms. Andrew Basiago got to Mars as a teenager through teleportation. These are the claims that he made. And William Whitecrow acted as a guard on Mars for Andrew Basiago and others who were visiting Mars with him. While Andy was a teenager, William was an older adult. But William described seeing these boar-like creatures hunting in packs on the surface of Mars. This one's by itself. It's not with a pack, but it does exactly match the description that William Whitecrow gave me in my initial 10 hours of interviews with him. With this strange ridge-like back. So again, it's not a pig, but it does have a pig-like snout right here. and I'm circling that with the mouse. And you can see the legs. The copyright text is covering that up a little bit right here, but you can see it more clearly if you look at the half-hour interview on my YouTube channel. Again, that's youtube.com/Timothy Cohen. Watch that interview with William Whitecrow, and you'll be able to see this leg. Again, it's got a joint right here, and it's bent right here where I'm moving the mouse cursor. So you can see some of the legs on the front of this thing. But again, William described this, so I thought I'd show this image to him, and I captured his reaction live to this image in that half-hour interview with him. This thing is actually possibly hunting another creature that's in the lower left-hand corner of this photo. This is a rodent in the lower left-hand corner. It's got very, very short legs. They're short, stubby legs, and you can't actually see the feet on this image. It's blurry, but you can see the feet. So I'm moving the mouse over the back leg, moving it over the front leg here. Here's another front leg right here. There's a shadow beneath this thing. This is the nose and the snout, and there's the mouth. You can see it a little more clearly in the interview with William Whitecrow without the copyright text. This is the shadow from one of the eyes, shadow from an ear, another shadow from an ear. So this is a little runt-like rodent right here. I'm circling it with a mouse. And this pig-like thing is looking right at it. Maybe it's hunting it. I don't know. Just speculating there. There's another creature in between these two right here where I'm circling it with a mouse. That's actually a creature. This is its head. You can't easily make it out in this image, but this is a creature, and here's its head. Fat-like thing. Might be a fossil. I don't know if it's dead. No idea. But it isn't a rock. So another interesting image. So here's another thing that William Whitecrow described for me in my interviews, and these are recorded interviews. I'm going to put those 10 hours of interviews on my YouTube channel at some point, folks. You'll be able to hear it directly. But in the meantime, you can hear his reaction to seeing this image for the first time when I showed it to him in my final half-hour interview with him. Okay, so let's move on here. All right, so Rex, this is the final image I'm going to show from Mars tonight. This, folks, is exactly what it looks like. It's a pistol-like weapon on the surface of Mars, photographed by one of the rovers. In the background is a head. So right here, you can't see it very well in this blown-up image. This is a reptile's head right here. There's its mouth, part of its eye, another eye. This is part of the snout of another reptile's head. There's just the nostrils of another reptile's head. Very, very poor image. Here's another reptile's head right here. I'm circling these things just to tell you what's in the image. I don't expect, Rex, anybody who's looking at these images to be able to recognize them. But I'm pointing out that that's what they are, just for context, for the size of this weapon in the front here. So, Rex, can you still hear me? Are you still with me, Rex?
I'm still here.
Okay, good, because I lost your facial video there. Just so small, I didn't know if I lost the feed. So anyway,
yeah, I'm still here, man. This is great. Keep going. This is fantastic.
Okay, so this here is a pistol-like weapon, but it's not a pistol. If you look at this, folks, here's the grip, just like you'd see on a pistol on Earth, you know, a conventional weapon. This is the trigger area right here. But the barrel is fatter and thicker than you're going to see on any pistol here on Earth. Yeah, this short, stubby barrel. There's actually a lens here at the end. It's not hollow. And above the grip is this round-like protrusion and this cavity. I'll call it a cavity right here. This is actually where the power pack for this thing fits. This is a microwave weapon. In other words, it incinerates, pulverizes what it's fired at a distance of like, 50 to 100 feet or 100 yards. I forget. I think it's like 50 to 100 feet. William Whitecrow and Andrew Bjago both separately described this weapon in the interviews for me. And they had other weapons, but Andrew Bjago has described this in several interviews that he's given for years and years as a flash gun. That's how he described it, because it's got this like flash of light that fires out of the end of the thing. It's an energy weapon that literally pulverizes whatever it hits to dust if it's a smaller creature. Like Andy described, for example, seeing this thing fired in the backyard of one of the scientists involved in the project, in the Mars Jumper project, at I think it was a goat, if I remember right, a sheep or a goat, but I think it was a goat in the backyard, and it turned the thing to dust. Okay. But Andy said that if this was fired at a dinosaur, it would bruise it or injure it, but it would not kill it because of how thick the skin was. It would irritate it unless it was relatively, really close. But William Whitecrow described this weapon as a pulse pistol. So Andy called it a flash gun, William Whitecrow a pulse pistol. I had William describe this thing for me in the 10 hours of interviews in as much detail as he could remember, meaning he described the grip, the area that we're seeing here at the top where the power pack would plug in, what the power pack itself looked like, what the barrel was like, how thick it was versus a conventional pistol, et cetera. So he gave me all those details. Again, not knowing anything, Rex, about who I was, that I'm an author, that I had any photos on Mars, absolutely nothing. In the case of William, the only reason he agreed to talk to me is because Andy, whom I'd interviewed first beforehand, said, talk to this guy. Okay, let him interview you. So I did 10 hours of interviews with William Whitecrow. And at the end, I did about a 35-minute interview with him, which is now posted on YouTube. I posted it on September 8th this year. Recorded it in February last year. So recorded it more than a year and a half ago. Kept it secret until this year. I'm just starting to go public, Rex, with all of this. This is going to blow the lid off of NASA's conspiracy and, frankly, conspiracies of a variety of other space agencies. They're colluding in this to not tell the public what's actually in these images. But right here, this thing was photographed by the rover. NASA took 4 separate photographs of this. This is just one of 4. And so here it is. It's enlarged, and actually in the original photograph, you can see the rover in the background. So we know it's on Mars. And additionally, you can see, like I said, fossils like this, fossilized heads. Some are better than what you can see behind this pistol. But again, not a great quality image, but good enough to see that you're looking at a weapon, not a creature, not a rock. There's no rock on Earth, folks, shaped or colored like this. Again, you look to your blue in the face and you die of old age every minute of every day, every second, every waking second of your life to try to find something like that in any rock formation or any beach or anywhere else on the planet that's not actually a weapon. So you're looking at a weapon here, photographed by the rover. And somebody described this for me beforehand in interviews. And, before NASA photographed this thing on Mars, they described this thing in interviews that others did with them. And so here we are, another piece of evidence that human beings, at least 2, William Whitecrow and Andrew Basiago, were on Mars, did in fact walk the surface of Mars. And therefore, the question is, how did they get there? One of them says he got there by reverse engineered anti-gravity craft. The other by Tesla teleportation. So in other words, according to him, the CIA and various private corporations in our government reverse engineered and engineered teleportation technology from things that Nikola Tesla initially worked on and left as spoils, if you will, for the government to find in his laboratory at the end of his life. They figured out later that one of the devices was actually a teleporter because somebody accidentally teleported around the world in the thing. And they thought he had been killed, and he came walking back through a lab door later, alive, and then told them, that he had ended up teleported, to another place on our planet, having walked through this device. So that's how they discovered what it did. But again, evidence that they were there. So I'll stop sharing these photos, Rex, and we can continue.
Okay. You've certainly left a lot to the imagination, and I am looking at these images, and you showed them to me off the air as well. So they a lot of them look just like rocks. I can see where you're coming up with the outlines and stuff like that. And I mean, absolutely no disrespect. You're showing so much, you're talking about so much detail on these things. Do you ever wonder if maybe it's kind of like pareidolia? Did I say that word right? Where you're looking at the clouds, you think
pareidolia. No, I call it pareidonia, for denying the object that's there. In other words, those who are willfully blind, and some people are willfully blind, others just don't see it. But let me point out, Rex, that fossils, when you're talking about something that is flash fossilized, they are rocks. They're rocks that were once creatures that have become stone, right? So when we see great pattern and detail and biological features in rocks, let's say that they're fossils, okay? Then yes, they look like rocks, perhaps to the untrained eye, but you're actually looking at fossils. And in this case, what I showed you tonight, some of the things that I point out might be flash fossilized fossils like that plesiosaur, definitely a fossil. Andrew Bjago's dump truck sized locust, most likely a fossil, but a very, very good one. That kind of patterning that you see there is what you'd see in a flash fossilized fossil. It's not something that you would find in rocks anywhere on Earth unless you're looking at a fossil. And in fact, folks, those of you who are skeptics, let me encourage you, go up on the internet and just Google fossils from Earth. Start looking at some of the things that paleontologists on Earth have identified as fossils and that are reported in our news media as fossils from Earth. Start looking at those, and what you will find, particularly the things that aren't just bones, there are depressions, for example, in rock and that kind of thing. What you will find is that those fossils are of very, 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 very poor quality compared to what I showed you tonight. And yet paleontologists are recognizing those things unambiguously on Earth as fossils. And so I'm absolutely confident, Rex, that they will recognize these things that I've shown tonight as fossils, and in some cases, living creatures.
Now, you also, let me go to your website here real quick. If you go to prophecyhouse.com, you have access to your books, your DVDs, and your different series. And you've also got a YouTube channel now that I'm going to leave a link in the video description box. You put some videos on there. And you're going to be at DisclosureCon that's coming up here in about a week, October 5th and 6th in Pine Top, Arizona. That's going to be really exciting. There's going to be, hopefully Andrew will be there and everything works out for him. There's going to be some wonderful guests there. You're going to be there. I'm excited to meet you. And are you planning on doing like a slideshow presentation where you can actually show people these pictures on a bigger screen, like an 80-inch screen TV versus they're looking on their phones? And are you going to be able to, and a lot of things too, I mean, when you put that copyright on there like that, it's kind of covering a lot of the stuff that you were talking about as well.
So let me, you asked a few questions there. I'll just respond to each of them. Yes, I will be at DisclosureCon. I will do a slideshow. I will show more photos than I showed tonight and other photos. And so far as Andrew Bjago goes, he'll be speaking remotely, I believe. He won't be traveling to attend the event in person, but he'll attend by audio. And I know that from speaking with him. And let me just say, Rex, right now I'm focusing on the initial part of the disclosure, which is Mars. And that's because I presented at the Mars Anomaly Research Society, which is focused on Mars, on September 8th. There was no press there. No news media attended whatsoever. They should be embarrassed because some of them were invited, but none of them attended, although I do know that there'll be press October 5th and 6th, and so I will show other photos. Now, I'm going to start with Mars at DisclosureCon, like I did at the Mars conference on September 8th. However, I've got a 3-hour slot, basically, at DisclosureCon, an hour and then 2 hours. So I'm going to go into some other things. I'm going to show people more. So let me just say some of the things, and I won't show all of these things at DisclosureCon, but they will be all in the books, and they will be things that I bring out in subsequent interviews and in subsequent, so hold off on that just a sec. Yeah, so that I'll bring out in subsequent interviews and subsequent presentations. But Rex, I have photos of NASA astronauts, for example, on the surface of the moon, face to face with living creatures that are only feet apart from the astronauts. I've got photos of, and these are in color and black and white. I've got photos of NASA astronauts.
Where did you get them?
Straight from NASA. I've got photos of NASA astronauts walking among corpses in their spacesuits on the surface of the moon. There's no possibility, in other words, that NASA doesn't know that there's dangerous, complex biological life on our moon, that there's dangerous, complex biological life on Mars, etc. There's zero possibility that they don't know that. Many of the rocks that NASA brought back from the moon, they've got those cataloged. You can actually go and pull up photographs of the rocks that were brought back from the surface of the moon, right? but you never see these in the media. But you can go to NASA's database on the internet. You can pull up photos of these rocks. In many cases, they're actually small heads. They're fossilized heads, Rex. And in a number of the rocks, it's obvious that you're looking at fossilized heads, reptile heads. Okay? NASA never talks publicly about that, ever. But you can actually go and see the NASA archives, the NASA photos on the internet. There are thousands and thousands of photos, and you can see how they catalog these things. You can see close-up photos of them, and you can see that you're not looking at ordinary rocks. So NASA brought back biological samples, dead ones, from the moon in the Apollo missions. I've got photos of them walking among much bigger ones, corpses, more than just heads, on the surface of the moon, in addition to being face-to-face with living creatures.
There's a lot of people in the chat room right now that would like to see those pictures for verification. And when you say NASA, what do you mean by NASA? Go directly to NASA.
I say NASA
just a second.
Directly from NASA.
Just a second. We go right now directly to nasa.gov and get those images?
If you knew where to look, yes.
So where do we look?
Not telling you. It's going to be in the books, and when I go public with it, I'll be showing the images. But let me tell you this. Every single image that I put in the books, Rex, the ebooks will have a live link, so people can go directly to the images on NASA's website, JPL's website, that's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Malin Space Science Center, or Science Systems website. You know, any image that I show, whether it's from NASA, the European Space Agency, Japan's Space Agency, JAXA, China's Space Agency, Russia's Space Agency, I've got images from all of them. And any image that I show in the ebook, I'm going to give a live link. People will be able to go directly to the source image. And in the larger images, like the panoramas, I'm going to give XY coordinates and software that shows the XY coordinates when you're browsing these images, you know, in the status bar at the bottom of the window. So people will be able to go to the exact XY coordinate where I got the image. In other words, from where I zoomed in and cropped, so they don't have to hunt everywhere to try to find it. They'll be able to go to the exact image off the official source, you know, government source, and then the exact XY coordinate when they've downloaded the image to see exactly what I'm presenting in the books. So they'll know it's not faked, it's not tampered with, nothing's been altered in the images whatsoever. They've just been zoomed, cropped, and in some cases, brightness and contrast adjusted. That is all officially sourced. So for example, when I talk about these Apollo astronauts, you know, face-to-face creatures on the moon, I'm going to give the images in the book. I'm going to give the links to the images to get those directly off NASA's site. But I'm also going to have an archive of images that I provide, probably on a Blu-ray disc, in case NASA decides to tamper with things, tries to pull images down off the net or whatever after the books are published. The images will be available in the archive on a Blu-ray disc, so people can get that from me if NASA tampers with it. And I'm taking precautions, you know, same thing, European Space Agency, et cetera, same thing. So they're not going to be able to cover it up. Let me say something too. I've got photos, before and after photos, for example, on the moon, where NASA, you know, covered up all kinds of creatures, for example, that are obvious, you know, in a good photo of the moon. So it looks like you're only looking at dunes. In the later photo, I've got the original photos, the untampered photos, and I've got the one that they tampered with, and I can put them side by side. I'm going to do that in the books. And I've also got a live link to the original untampered photos on NASA's site. So NASA, you know, doesn't even know some of the stuff that can be accessed. And
there's some people asking how you can copyright NASA photos.
Well, they're all public domain. So you can't copyright the original unaltered photo, but if you zoom in, you crop, you adjust brightness and contrast, you add arrows to point things out. Anything you do like that, you can copyright it. So that's perfectly legal and doable. You can do that in any public domain photo. And in fact, all the government photos that NASA's taken are basically public domain because they were paid for with taxpayer funds. And NASA's compelled under law to make them publicly available. So yeah, you can do that. Anybody can go and, you know, do anything with an image. They can alter it, which I don't encourage doing, obviously. But crop it, zoom in on it, clean it up, draw arrows to show what you're pointing out. Anything like that, you can copyright it.
Well, Tim, thank you for coming on the program. I am going to pick up one of those books just to see what you're talking about. I don't mind spending some money to see those pictures. I'm sure I could find them through NASA if I really look, but I want to see if they're what you say they are, because there's just a lot left to the imagination now after many of these images that you show. There's actually a paleontologist in the chat when you were talking about how paleontologists would see it and they would see something more than rocks, but they didn't. But hey, it could have been the size of the screen. I don't know. And once again, it's not my decision. I'm just bringing the information to the table to let people decide for themselves. And you spent the time out of your busy schedule to come on the program. I know that it's very important to you. So, folks, hey, it is what it is. It's for you to decide. And until we get there, how do we know? We actually need to get out there. But looking at the pictures of.
Let me make two closing points, if you don't mind. Paleontologists, they need to be familiar with flash fossilization. That's a relatively recent thing in paleontology as a subject. Most are not, actually, which is surprising. Even PhDs in paleontology who've been doing it for decades are not very well versed in flash fossilization. So they need to know about that. That's one thing, because these fossils that we're looking at that I showed tonight are not bones. They're better than bones. They're fully fossilized creatures. So that's an issue for paleontologists. Secondly, when we talk about, oh gosh, I forgot my point.
You just got harped. NASA's outside right now. They got the 5G van.
I remember my point, Rex. So it's not all going to be creatures in these books. I'm going to be showing artifacts also, high technology. So in other words, objects that are artificial objects are also on Mars and in some other places. Better photos than anyone has seen, that anyone has ever pointed out from Mars. I will be showing those things as well in the books. So there are examples of actual high technology, another kind of indirect evidence for life on Mars.
Well, Tim, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of people at the conference that are going to want to see those pictures and that information that you haven't shared with us here at the Leak Project. You're definitely, you have got mixed reactions in the live stream. And once again, thank you for coming on the program. It was great to talk to you. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure to go to leakproject.com, get access to over 2,000 exclusive podcasts. They're not all exclusive, but over 2,000 podcasts. Many are exclusive at leakproject.com. Downloadable, streamable, ad-free. Also, we've got some of these 5G shielding caps left. This isn't a 5G shielding cap. It's over there. But guess what? We've got a few of those left. Be excellent to each other, everybody. And remember, be the change you want to see.